Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Paul, a very good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Pete.
How the devil are you, my good man?
I'm fine, thank you, and you?
I'm getting there, brother. I always think of it like the weather. You know, some days are fantastic, other days not so. But hey, tomorrow is only a day away, as they say. But today's a good day. I get to talk with you. I always enjoy having returning guests on the podcast because it really adds those chapters of evolution. You know, I always say our ideas evolve. And, you know, science is one of those things that, especially for me, it's a snapshot of interpretation at the time. You know,
very true.
I think before we had the telescope and before we had, you know, the microspectrometer and all this sort of stuff, our perceptions of certain things, whether it's evolution or psychology or physiology, what is it, the percentage of the brain that we understand now? It's a very small amount, isn't it?
Very tiny amount. Probably even smaller as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think it is. I think we're like a level 1 interpretation. Even we spend so much time looking into the sky. And I don't think we've really properly finished looking in the ocean, have we? We've looked at a very small percentage of it, and we track something like 3% of the sky, don't we?
It's tiny amounts. Me. I tend to spend most of my life looking down at papers, basically.
Thanks for coming on this morning, mate. I'm really excited to get back into. I've been looking at a bunch of your work and some of your recent posts and stuff like that. I wanted us to A, revisit a bunch of stuff that we spoke about in our first conversation, and B, talk about the development of the technology, your insights, your interpretation, and kind of shine the light on the next steps of where we're going. Do you have anything pertinent on your list that you'd like us to navigate towards?
Well, I think, I'm not sure, I can't remember what happened yesterday, never mind the last time we did it, but what's become apparent, certainly in the last 8 months, is that we can essentially see 5 hazards from electric vehicles that are distinct for electric vehicles.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
Obviously, you've got the toxic smoke or vapor cloud, but we've then got, as well as the kind of rocket-like flames if the vapor cloud ignites immediately, we've got 2 types of vapor cloud explosion. And these have become apparent. We knew we could get unconfined vapor cloud explosions. The gas leaks to the outside of the electric vehicle and explodes. We've seen that. But what we didn't realise, what's only just become apparent from the likes of several Jeep Wrangler explosions, explosions involving Renault Zoes and Volvos, that you can get 2 types of confined vapor cloud explosion. And by confined, I mean it happens inside the vehicle. So the first type, and it all comes down, everything comes down to the huge volumes of gas that lithium-ion batteries produce when they're in thermal runaway.
I recall, I think one of the ones we looked at last time was B18 working around, I think that was a Jeep Wrangler as well.
Yeah.
And just a sudden,
yes,
very sudden, it blows the whole roof off, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. But we've also seen, and that was a confined where it goes into the passenger compartment. Mm-hmm. And that's now occurred more than once. Okay, so it vents into the passenger compartment and then explodes. The other one is where the battery, the gases is so huge, the battery itself undergoes a pressure explosion, which then ignites. And both of those cases, the explosion occurs inside the car, so you get shrapnel. And certainly,
why is it going? So 2 questions. In fact, let's cycle back for a second. Explain for people what a vapor cloud explosion is, because I always need to stop ourselves and make sure we're not getting into an echo chamber.
So a vapor cloud explosion strictly is not an explosion. It's a subsonic ignition. In other words, the pressure front moves slower than the speed of sound. An explosion is where the pressure front moves faster than the speed of sound, but strictly it's a vapor cloud deflagration. But deflagrations have the potential to kill and cause damage. And essentially a vapor cloud is a mixture of gas and fine droplets of typically an organic solvent. And both in the case of the vapor cloud from a lithium-ion battery, the gases can explode, the hydrogen can explode, the carbon monoxide can explode, but also independently, if you're at concentrations less than the lower explosion limit for these, the droplets of organic solvent can actually explode. I mean, we've seen.
So for people's awareness
like,
as well, this doesn't actually require an ignition source as such, does it? In these instances, I know there is a flame present in these, but just to compare it to
just
whether
be a hot surface. Something
reaches its auto ignition temperature under
that's
that
it.
sweet spot of pressure and that mixture of its explosive limit.
You also have to understand that the amount of energy required to ignite a hydrogen explosion is tiny. If you take a 5p piece and drop it from hip height to the floor, the energy that's released in that drop is enough to ignite a hydrogen explosion. And what we've got in the vapor cloud is typically for the higher energy density chemistries, like you'd find in electric vehicles, 30 to 50% hydrogen. Okay? And essentially what you've got is a witch's brew, because you've got hydrogen, you've got carbon monoxide, you've got hundreds of organic compounds present at trace amounts, you've got the organic droplets of organic solvent, and thermal runaway is a chemical process that produces chemical products, and they are vented as well. And I'm starting to suspect, although I don't have direct evidence yet, that we always get two forms of the vapor cloud, the visible forms of the vapor cloud, which are almost certainly droplets of something. You get a heavier than air form and a lighter than air form. And I'm starting to suspect that the heavier than air form are these long chain products, longer molecules that are produced by the chemical reactions that take place during thermal runaway. And we can't predict whether we'll get a heavier than air or lighter than air form, but one and one only dominates. And so, as I come back to the confined vapor cloud explosions, the battery undergoes a pressure explosion because of the sheer volume. We've done tests on battery packs, and we've seen the battery pack burst apart because of the sheer pressure of gas. And
is that because it's venting at such a rate that the structure of it can't? Because most people will be familiar with seeing it starting to hiss off, and then having a jet-like flame coming from it, and a massive dump of this.
It can depend upon. It depends upon the topology, the structure of the case. Okay, and if you're getting such a huge volume of gas that at some point the case will pop. Okay, and the problem then
is it's not designed to store gas. It's not a cylinder.
It's not designed.
It's
meant
not
to be watertight.
It's not a hydrostatic test. Yeah. It's just a watertight.
But we did
package.
We did three battery pack tests, 40 kilowatt hour battery pack tests. We did two at RAF Speardatum and one at my great friends, the Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service in training centre in Bury. The first two we did at RAF Speardatum, the DNV site. The battery pack popped, but the gas immediately ignited and just shot out in all directions. In the one we did in the training centre, it didn't ignite. It just popped the case a bit and then it vented from weak spots, and it just kept on venting the vapor cloud. See, and this is, I mean, fire, first responders can deal with fire. They can deal with explosions. But what you've got is an equilibrium, if you like, or a two components, fire and explosion, and it can flick back and forwards between them. So we've actually done other tests on a small pack, and the gas is vented from prismatic cells, and in one case there was no ignition, it just filled the space and then exploded, vapor cloud explosion. But in the other case, the gases, when they immediately ignited, but the force they came out of the cells was so great, they put themselves out, and they went out. And then they ignited again. And the incident you were talking about with that Jeep Wrangler, if you notice, and I only noticed this a few months ago, after the explosion, because there's no fire before, there's no fire afterwards, then vents the vapor cloud again. See, so...
This episode is brought to you in partnership with MSA Safety. Today we have them to thank for the improved firefighter safety through connectivity in their brand new connected firefighter system. At the center of the connected firefighter platform is the MSA M1 SCBA with telemetry. That integrates straight in with the Luna system, which is a wireless all-in-one device creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. All of this then plugs into the FireGrid system for cloud-based connectivity, real-time information, and data-driven decisions for the incident commander. MSA are truly taking massive strides in the future of improved firefighter safety through connectivity in the brand new MSA Connected Firefighter platform. Now back to the show.
So are these typically the battery packs that you tested? You said they're 40 kilowatt. Just for people, again, having interpretation. Give me comparisons from a battery pack that I carry, like the ones that I use to charge my phone versus what I'd find in an EV. Are they all born the same? Are they all born equal, or is this behavior indicative of a certain type?
They're different chemistries, but if you look, for example, at a power tool battery, that might be of the order of 10 watt hours, not kilowatt hours. An e-scooter battery is typically around about 250 watt hours. In other words, a quarter of a kilowatt hour. But already, with an e-scooter battery, we are generating vapor cloud explosions. We've seen vapor cloud explosions from e-scooter batteries. E-bike, half a kilowatt hour. And then we move to things like, electric vehicles. A hybrid can be a mild hybrid, which is 2 kilowatt hours, to something like 30 kilowatt hours, 17 kilowatt hours, 30 kilowatt hours. Full battery powered vehicle is now 40 kilowatt hours to around about 100 kilowatt hours, but that's creeping up now. I believe the new Teslas, some of the Teslas are like 120 kilowatt hours.
And then we get stretching for that mileage, aren't we? We're looking for
and
that
then
mileage.
Electric buses, we're talking 300 to 500 kilowatt hours. HGVs, we can be talking 1,000 kilowatt hours. But I should also emphasize that the probability is very low. The chances are that your viewers, the first responders, many of them may never ever see an electric vehicle incident. However, what we can't predict at the moment is what the effect of aging is as these get used, especially as we rocket charge. We very rapid charge batteries. The one thing that academics agree on, and as you must know, dealing with academics is like herding cats. But the one thing that academics agree on that are in this field is that if you rapid charge lithium-ion batteries, you cause lithium metal plating, and that destabilizes the batteries. So we've got to need to do research on the aging and the effect of aging, use and misuse on the thermal stability of these large lithium-ion battery systems.
So
and then, of course,
the misuse element of that, this is where I feel like we can get drawn to the big scary things. So you've said about buses, large HGVs, brand new Teslas, things like that. My greatest concern, actually, I've visited quite a number of large cities in the past month or two. The proliferation of these small e-bikes and e-scooters, because someone's own personal vehicle or an electric fire engine or a HGV is having quite a rigid maintenance process. And I would say that's a wide spectrum as well. Of course, some of them will be poor. But when I see the way that these e-scooters, and I've been, you just walk around, they're just everywhere. You can just kind of log on with an app. The damage that they go through is horrific. Because they're members of the public using them, idiots like me, bumping into stuff, scraping up and down curbs. They're kind of half designed for the environment, but they're kind of also not. They are obviously significantly smaller, but they're enough to cause someone a life-changing injury. And those ones are actually, with so many cities looking to go green, and I would add the caveat that I do love them. They're very fun. They're very efficient. I think they probably reduce our traffic. I always say there's no solutions, only trade-offs. Do you know what I mean? So they're reducing the large traffic, all of the cloud that we're getting from all of these exhausts in the cities and breathable air and blah 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 blah. But that inherently is causing me some concern. Could you just speak to that for a second and any knowledge that you have on how much these are becoming widely used?
What I'll say is that it's not electric cars that are killing people. The deaths that we've had with electric cars are down usually to crashes, typically because people don't realise they've got a huge acceleration. The torque on an electric motor is much greater than that on a conventional vehicle. So the deaths that have occurred with electric cars are down to crashes. But we've had 13 or 16 deaths just in this country due to e-scooters and e-bikes in the last few years. And hundreds of house, home, flat fires and hundreds of injuries. And it's basically, if we look at the proliferation of the, if you like, the public scooters in towns, I'm kind of less worried about them because they are maintained. Yeah. You know, each night they're taken in, they're charged, and presumably somebody checks them out. What worries me are the members of the public having their own scooters, buying them from online vendors with no interest in looking after the safety of these things. Yeah. The quality control can be extremely poor of the ones that we're buying from abroad. You know, I'd buy a named brand one relatively happily. I just would never charge it indoors. I would never buy an e-scooter or an e-bike from an online store, particularly if I did not recognise the name on the scooter or the e-bike. I just wouldn't touch them.
Well, there's an irony there because we're never going to charge, not never. Our ability to charge them outdoors, again, because let's just place the template of where these things are being used in their environment. Heavily built city, a lot of crime.
Flats.
You've bought them because you want to get around, you've not got your own parking spot. You don't want to leave it in the corridor because it's not like an electric vehicle, in my personal limited knowledge, where my car's plugged in outside now, it's an EV. Someone can't just walk along, I'm sure they could if they're knowledgeable enough, unplug it and steal it because they've still actually got to steal a car. And cars are hard to steal and EVs are actually very heavy, aren't they? But a scooter,
yes, you can
just
pick it
run
up
away
and
with
walk
that really
off.
easily.
First, I'll make 2 points here. The first point is that if we impose draconian regulations, we will effectively exclude the poorer in our society from having access to this.
Yes, sir.
So what I say is, right, if you're going to have an e-scooter or an e-bike, don't charge it indoors. Now, but if you absolutely have to, do not charge it when you're away or when you're asleep. Don't charge it in a main escape route. Don't charge it where there's anything else that can catch fire. And
Paul, when I'm up and awake, I want to use it.
Yeah, well,
I don't want to charge it at night. I'm just playing devil's advocate. That's what the public's going to be saying, isn't it?
Well, they mustn't charge. There is some absolutes where you're going to have to sacrifice a little bit of, if you like, your personal freedom just to keep you and your family and the rest of the people around you safe. And buy only from reputable dealers. Do not mix and match chargers because there isn't one lithium-ion battery. There are many different types, many different lithium-ion battery chemistries. There's about 6 or 7, okay? Each chemistry requires a different charging protocol, okay? So don't mix and match chargers. And finally, if you see anything, any kind of gas, if you hear any kind of loud noise, don't try and deal with it yourself. Don't try and throw it outside or anything like that. Get out, alert everybody else, and phone the fire brigade because the biggest problem with lithium-ion batteries in terms of when they're in thermal runaway is how quickly you go from a battery fire to a house or flat fire. Our fire services arrive within 4 to 5 minutes, but it's already a house fire. Now, every day in London, they've got a house or flat fire due to an e-scooter or an e-bike. And they arrive there in good time, but the time it takes, because of that rocket-like flame, or because of the explosion of the gas, it rapidly becomes a flat or house fire. And one of my other great areas of concern is the marine industry, because I really do not think they are prepared at all. And I don't know if you saw that we had an EV go up in South Korea in the last couple of days.
No, I've not seen that one.
It was in an underground car park, an electric Mercedes. It wasn't on charge, as I understand. First of all, there was a vapor cloud explosion. Then there was a fire. 70 vehicles were damaged and 20 people were taken to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries, inhalation problems, basically. Now,
I can see that. Sorry, you shared it on your
it's on the LinkedIn
21
site.
injured.
Yeah, so it basically, your marine firefighter, well, typically you don't have a marine firefighter on board car transporter ships or ferries. You have crewmen who get about 2 days training. Now, the time it takes to assemble the fire guys who are going to fight the fire from when the first alert is given, and this is from my friends who are trained marine firefighters, can be at least 20 minutes to 30 minutes. And I've just told you, these things develop very, very quickly. And also, the recent EU projects, Lashfire and Albro, have given a completely complacent and incorrect conclusion that you can treat an EV fire just like a conventional vehicle fire. The tests that were carried out on dry land, in the open air, and they didn't take into account the vapor cloud explosion hazards at all. And this, in my view, has resulted in a complacent attitude of the marine industry, which I believe could put passengers and crew lives at risk.
The team here at the podcast are extremely excited to announce our brand new partnership with Patrol Store UK. Patrol Store has been serving the UK's police, fire and emergency communities and first responder sector since 2008, providing leading brands such as Hikes, Magnum, 511, Nebo, Opzulu, Highlander, AKU and many, many more of our favourites. They are now also supplying bespoke uniform, PPE and station workwear to fire services around the UK. So for all our listeners that are part of your USAR, your HART team, your ISAR team, your armed response teams, your fire investigation, your NALO, your hazmat and all of the training departments that have got your own budgets, be sure to get the absolute best for your team at a realistic price by contacting Aaron and the team at Patrol Store and referencing the Firefighters podcast. Patrol Store will also be taking part in our listener competition giveaways as well as providing unique discounts to podcast listeners. So for people that are always asking about Hikes boots as an example, that is one unique discount code that is coming to you very soon through Patrol Store. We've also got some incredible bags. I mean, the Opzulu bags are a game changer. So you know the really Gucci and expensive tactical black bags that everyone's using in CrossFit workouts and taking to the gym and taking to stations? Well, they've basically got that, but it's made better and costs less, because they're not slapping some Gucci expensive brand name on it and it's giving you what you want on a first responder salary. Be sure to keep your eyes in the notes of the episodes for links to unique offers and discount codes. And if you're looking to buy well and buy once, be sure to get in the notes and head over to Patrol Store UK. Now back to the show. Well, this incident you refer to here, just to go into some more depth, you've kindly sort of gone over the details of it there. So 21 injured after Mercedes EV explodes in a parking lot. This was Thursday, 1st of August. Mercedes-Benz exploded underground parking lot at an apartment complex in Incheon. They're sending 21 people to hospital, non-life-threatening injuries. If you scroll down and people look at the rest of this article, we'll put a link in there. It almost really developed into a high-rise fire, because 103 people were evacuated and 106 rescued from stairs and balconies amid suffused smoke. Some 70 cars parked in the Mercedes were damaged. Good Lord, the damage that this thing sort of causes. When you look at the pictures of the parking lot, it's just engulfed in smoke or gas or fumes.
Yeah, but have you actually seen the Fremantle Highway incident? Which was the car transporter that caught fire. It ended up being docked in the Netherlands. Now, there are different interpretations. Well, the official report has not been published. Initially, they said there was no electric vehicles on board. Then it turns out that there was indeed 500 electric vehicles. Now, experts like myself who have actually visited the ship or have seen the footage, have listened to the radio communication between the seamen on board and the Coast Guard, are convinced that was a massive vapor cloud explosion. This 100-meter long ship, the top deck was bowed something like 2 meters. And we've never seen that kind of damage on any kind of car transporter fire before. And if you looked inside the ship, the I-beams that supported that deck were ripped apart about 1.5 meters, 2 meters.
Good
Again,
Lord.
That kind of damage has not been seen before. And sadly, very sadly, one crew member died on board that ship. And if you remember the Felicity Ace, that has now been attributed to electric vehicle. Really? And there's all sorts of litigation flying around. And that sank. And the time between the crewman seeing the first signs of the fire and actually alerting the captain was sufficient, basically, that the captain then decided to abandon ship.
Oh, God.
So,
how close do you think we are to banning these things from these vessels?
I don't think we are, because
Not that I would like it to happen at all, but
we have to remember that the number of incidents involving electric vehicles is still tiny. Okay, the percentage is minute. It's much, much less than conventional vehicles. We just have to understand
the number of
risks
aeroplanes that crash is very small, but people are still petrified of flying.
Well, yeah, exactly. And also, we go through, what we have to do is to manage the risk. Now, if we go back to the late 19th century, we probably had all sorts of accidents involving petrol, the new petrol-driven vehicle, the horseless carriage. But we learned to deal with the risks. Everything to having aluminium nozzles on the petrol pumps, so there was no spark. Somebody obviously realised that there must have been an explosion involving a spark, and they've realised. So we are excellent at managing risk, and I do believe that we will manage the risk, and we're already seeing it with battery energy storage systems. If you actually look at the number of containers that have burned or exploded, containers rather than sites, compared to the number of containers in the world, it's dropping. It's minute. And that's because of the standards, becoming more aware of the actual risks and hazards and how we can send lithium batteries into thermal runaway. And developers, basically, in this country, for example, voluntarily following the standards in America, because we have no standards here. We will manage the risk. But we have to, first of all...
Sometimes there's such an aversion to the risk, though, that it stops us from stepping forward. I always think of nuclear power as an example of this. And even though it's not your area of specialism, I know you'll know significantly more about than me, so I apologise as I fumble my way through this. But when I think of, Fukushima and Chernobyl, these disasters didn't really... I think Fukushima killed one person, something like that, and the fallout obviously damaged a lot of things over time. But from my limited interpretation, like if you use nuclear submarines as an example, we've solved the energy problem. Surely, there's people been living on them for 40 years, but they require a massive investment, and we have a big fear about what we do with the waste. And then we have the echoes of disasters again, like Fukushima and Chernobyl, that fill us with fear. But also, I think there's such a long-term investment involved in these. Like they say, great leadership is when you plant trees under which you'll never sit. And I think that you'd have to pay a lot over 6 or 8 years for nuclear power, but then it'd be free for the next 15 or 20. And no one will ever do it because we're only in, the government changes every week.
Well, we probably will have to invest in nuclear power because solar energy can go so far. What they do say, however, is if we had Michigan, for example, covered in solar energy arrays, that would power the world. But I think we're probably going to have to invest in nuclear power. But we are very good at managing risk, and I do believe we will get there. It's just that we have to, first of all, I think one of the biggest problems, and probably the single biggest factor in lithium-ion battery incidents, is the human factor. Somebody somewhere abuses it, or has badly designed the system, or does something stupid. And the human factor is incredibly important. And in a lot of the fires and explosions involving electric vehicles, it's the human factor that is behind it. But
we tend to attribute it to the technology at the minute, not the human. Like if an aeroplane goes down in the Hudson River, we accuse Sully, of error, and we go into the human factors. But with this, we seem to be very focused on the technology being the problem.
Ever heard the quote that true leaders are readers? Well, we believe this is true. Listeners often ask where we go to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the sector globally. So there are a few key publications which I encourage you to go check out. Now, if you're looking for insights on disaster management, fire protection and firefighting, for us, we go to Asia Pacific Fire Magazine. And when you're looking for the latest on the Middle East fire protection industry and fire services, it's Gulf Fire Magazine. And our quarterly check-in is with International Firefighter Magazine, reporting to municipal, industrial and fire training professionals. Now, next up, and widely accepted to be the global voice for passive and active fire protection, this is a good one. It's International Fire Protection Magazine. And finally, and perhaps the most relevant to our predominantly UK audience, I'd strongly suggest subscribing to UK Fire Magazine, reporting to the United Kingdom fire protection industry and fire services. We're really excited to announce that after a long-standing relationship and mutual respect, we've now partnered with MDM Publishing, who bring you all of these essential publications. Because in a world of change, the learners shall inherit the earth, while the learned shall find themselves perfectly suited for a world that no longer exists. Eric Hoffer said that, and I believe he was right. So keep growing, keep learning, and keep yourself in the know and at the cutting edge of what's happening globally by dropping into the notes. And as a gift from the podcast, you can actually subscribe to any of these publications for free using the link in our notes. Now back to the show.
Yeah, well, it's because it's very new in real terms. Big batteries are really, we can probably trace the start of big batteries with the 2008 introduction of the Tesla Roadster. And I mean, there was then 2010 before the Nissan Leaf appeared. But that's kind of when it starts. So it's only 14 years ago, okay? So they're still big news when they go up. There's 65 or whatever conventional vehicle fires every day in this country. I don't know what the exact number is. It's something like that. We ignore because we're used to
No one's
them.
talking about them.
Yeah. So
we're creating micro explosions in our internal combustion engine.
Yeah.
Thousands every second. And everyone goes, it's safe though, isn't it? Do you know how it works?
We're sitting on a petrol tank as well.
You're sitting on a petrol tank and intentionally creating multiple explosions. It's just like you say, it's the familiarity with it.
What we forget also is that hydrogen fuel cells, which is a battery, it's a type of battery. In fact, the original fuel cell was called the gas battery. They were discovered in 1839. Okay, now the lead acid battery was discovered in 1859 by LaPlante, and it was immediately commercialised. In real terms, we still haven't solved the problems of the hydrogen oxygen fuel cell that were identified way back in 1839, 1840, but hydrogen oxygen fuel cell driven vehicles, buses, tractors, vans have been around since the 1980s. In fact, since the 1960s. And in the 1980s, a hydrogen-powered hydrogen fuel cell bus ran around Toronto, the Ballard bus. Okay, so we had these buses with gas cylinders full of hydrogen in them. But we couldn't. The technology had been around for long enough that we knew how to manage the risk, and we're very good at managing hydrogen risk. The gas
makes up a very small part of our atmosphere, though, doesn't it? Why can we never quite solve the nitrogen equation?
God's got a sense of humour.
Okay,
Apart from being
that's the most abundant gas, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, there is technology being developed based around ammonia as a vector, energy vector.
Oh, wow.
And because, of course, you've got NH3, one nitrogen, 3 hydrogens. So there's a lot of clever people, and there are a lot of clever people working on the next generation of batteries. And, there are already...
That's where the commercial is at the minute, isn't it? That's where the money is, so...
But there's redox flow batteries, for example, which are ideal for battery energy storage systems. They're completely safe. They will not burn because they're aqueous. They're based on water. And they're really flexible, and they've got all sorts of advantages, and they're really well into the commercialization stage.
What was the myth about the person that invented the water-fueled car?
Yeah, well, I've seen any number of claims in my 30-odd years of basically cars being fueled by fresh air or whatever. There's a whole branch of kind of social science based around these kind of claims. I mean, we had cold fusion. I was kind of on the periphery of cold fusion. We had polywater, and as long as you tell people what they want to believe, then you can sell something to them. Yeah. Whether there's good science behind it or not. And I'm afraid that's also happening in lithium-ion batteries and some of the claims by certain suppliers for suppression systems.
One thing that really a lot of people are concerned about, if we zoom out away from the immediate risk of these things going into thermal runaway, is and it's a paper, a really interesting paper you wrote. I think you only put it out this morning, in fact, some communications on it. The roadmap for sustainable circular economy and lithium-ion future battery technologies, because what happens to these things after we're done with them, the wider damage of making these things. Could you shine a light on the purpose of that? But I mean, I've got it up in front of me now, actually, but I know you're familiar with it, being the author, or being one of the authors, sorry. Help people understand what that's about, because I want to put a link into that, because I'm just scrolling through it now and I find it quite interesting.
When rightly now we are focused on decarbonisation, and that means basically that in terms of the energy that's required, an electric vehicle is clean, okay? When you plug it in, so long as you're using electricity from a solar array, great. But if you then zoom out, where did all the bits from that car come from?
Yes.
Right?
The actual life cycle of this creation.
Life cycle analysis is an increasingly important aspect of basically science, full stop. And a very good friend of mine, Professor Oliver Heidrich, who's, I believe, on that paper, he's an expert on this. But essentially, you've got to look at what is the cost, first of all, in energy terms, of digging up the minerals. What is the cost of transporting them? What is the cost of making the vehicle? And then
it's the availability of those minerals as
again,
well,
also the availability. And this is a circular argument, because that then comes round to what happens at the end. Now, there are two stages for the end of an electric vehicle's life. The first stage is, in principle, after 20% of the battery has lost capacity, it's no longer any good in the vehicle, so you should take it out and use it for something else. Now, there are questions about the safety aspects of that, but that's basically called repurposing. And you should try and repurpose the batteries, because that extends their life. And then at the end of life, the true end of life, you need to smash it up and get all the materials back so you can reuse them. So you don't have to dig holes in the ground. So, and what we don't have at the present
how expensive
time,
is that chemical separation
how
process,
expensive is it? And at the moment, it is expensive. You don't get, when you recycle an electric car, the money you get is for the bits of the car that isn't the battery, really. But the other question is, do we have a recycling industry? And at the moment, we don't. You know, up until Brexit, we sent our little lithium-ion batteries, just the little ones, abroad to be dealt with. Now, there are some really good companies just
kick the problem over the fence.
Yeah, we kicked the problem over the fence. And, it's been recycled. Now, if they were then taken out to some poor country and dumped, that wasn't our problem, and maybe to a certain extent that's the case now. We do know that electric vehicle battery packs are being stockpiled at the present time because there isn't the industry to recycle them, and we can't send them abroad.
Well, you give an example in the paper of stockpiling tyres in Wales, and that smouldered for 15 years from 1989 to 2004 because we didn't have an easily available, efficient process for getting rid of them.
We have to understand that if we are going to have a truly virtuous cycle, we need a fully funded, fully resourced recycling industry. But let's go back again to the beginning. There are also human factors here. The cobalt that comes out to go in our batteries is dug up by child labour in the Congo.
I know, it's such an awkward, horrible truth, isn't it? It's in everyone's pocket.
And basically what we're saying is, hey, we're green, but don't look behind us at all the kind of things we're doing to make it look like we're green. And don't look ahead of us to see, well, in fact, we haven't quite got that link in the chain, i.e. recycling, sorted yet.
I think it's such an uncomfortable reality because it's accelerating at such a rate, and we do live in a disposable world now. Unfortunately, you can order something off Amazon, you want it here tomorrow, and nothing you're going to buy off Amazon is going to make you happy for the next 10 years, or another company for that matter.
No.
So we like to, value preach to these aspirational sort of utopian ideas of not damaging the earth, but I don't see that we can stem our impatience for innovation and development, because that's what gets so rewarded and recognized. We're moving forward in leaps now. It's not like a numerical 1, 2, 3. This is how we're progressing. We're absolutely taking leaps now as these technologies collide with each other. I know it's something that we spoke about before, but I wanted to reflect back for a second. The incident we just spoke about, they said took 8 hours to extinguish. And I know it's something we covered in our first conversation, but I wondered if there's been any development on it from the aspect of contaminated water and runoff that comes from. Talk to us for a second about tackling these incidents, perhaps specifically in an EV battery framework and
the first
and the
point
runoff.
Is a really good fire service to look at is the Norwegian one, because they've got lots of electric vehicles, and also the Netherlands. Now, the Norwegians generally find that only about, less than half of the electric vehicles that go up involve the battery. And if that's the case, you can put it out. 20 minutes, it's out. It's a conventional vehicle fire, okay? Mm-hmm. The trick is knowing for sure if the battery's involved or not. If the battery's involved, it is utterly pointless putting water on that vehicle. Utterly pointless. The battery case is designed to keep water out. Underneath, you've got a metal plate to protect it from debris on the road. And then you've got this brilliant umbrella all around it, which is the chassis. So you're not going to get water anywhere near it's needed. Now, the corollary of that is that if you do succeed in putting out the fire, and for example, I've seen a video of water mist being used to put out an electric vehicle fire, and it does, and then there's a hydrogen explosion above the water mist head, because it doesn't stop thermal propagation. And I was at Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. We were testing so-called lithium-ion battery fire extinguishers for domestic battery energy storage systems using 10 kilowatt hour batteries. And virtually all of the 5 suppression systems we tested put the fire out very quickly. But in every single case, it didn't stop thermal propagation because it couldn't get into where it was needed. So they boiled off the vapour cloud, and we had to pull our firefighter out, Aidan, who was in full PPE and breathing apparatus because of worries of a vapour cloud explosion. And this was despite the fact where we were, which was in Manchester Towers, had a ventilation system, but it just filled the room with the vapour cloud and kept doing it for a long time. So if you put the fire out, what you're essentially doing with a large lithium-ion battery is converting it to a fractured gas cylinder. And up to 50% of the gas that's coming out is hydrogen. So the let it burn standard operating procedure is the best one. But now that we are starting to see, and we've seen 3 Renault Zoes explode, we've seen 2 Jeep Wranglers, I think a Volvo hybrid, undergo confined vapour cloud explosions with shrapnel. That means that we need, or you need as a fire service, first responders, to start considering, red, green and amber zones. That would be my suggestion. Where you're going to have to really assess what's going on, because if you could get literally no warning of a confined vapour cloud explosion if the battery explodes. And if there is fire, there's one in South Korea where the battery explodes, and indeed there's a famous one in Shanghai underground. The flames were 10 meters long or more, and they're shooting out. So the let it burn scenario, I believe, is the only one you can use. But if it's in an urban area, if it's in a busy street, then maybe you're looking towards what the Netherlands fire service do, which they've got 50 recovery firms licensed to use these big containers. They put the electric vehicle in the container. They don't necessarily fill it with water. That just contains it. But if they have to, they then fill it with water. Okay? But even over there, they acknowledge that once we have large numbers of electric vehicles on the road, that'll probably be too expensive a method to use.
And there's no appetite to pushing some of that cost onto the manufacturers, I would imagine, because they'll tell you they're not going to catch fire.
Well, the trouble is that the manufacturers are going through a very rough time at the present time. Battery manufacturers are complaining about the drop in sales.
If you're a regular listener to the podcast, then chances are you are big into your own personal development and the development of firefighters around you. So I wanted to remind you of our mobile app Drillbook. This is a free training and development resources made by firefighters for firefighters. Heading on to Drillbook, you will find incident debriefs, radio messages, notes and lines, quick reference guides, quizzes every single day. We've got useful links to the ERG, to Web Rescue, to Jessup, Euro Rescue, 10-second triage, National Operational Guidance, and not to mention our daily quizzes where you will find questions on extrication, casualty handling, breathing apparatus, fire development, water rescue, rope rescue, you name it. It is the go-to resource if you've got a spare 5 minutes on the firehouse to develop yourself and those around you. Not only that, if you're looking to get into the fire service, we've got advice on there on interview questions, interview answers. You can build your own questioning in there. And again, remember, this is built by firefighters for firefighters, so you can add your own drills in there. You can pick the drills that you find the most favorite. There is literally hundreds of training ideas, hundreds of drills in there. Remember, this app is absolutely free and it grows every single day down to the contributions of our thousands and thousands of users. It's freely available on Android, Apple, and you will find it in the links for this podcast. Remember, it's called personal development. The clue's in the name. You've got to work twice as hard on yourself as you do on the job. So always be growing, always be developing. Now let's get back to the show.
So it goes back to this Cordon analogy, this red, amber, green, because like you say, if it's on the thing is, you're not going to find them anywhere else. If it's on a roadway, let it burn. The temperature at which these things burn is going to cause damage to the M1.
It could, could cause. It doesn't necessarily have to, but depends which way the flame goes. But yes, you could erode the surface of the road.
Could erode the surface of the road. If the battery's not involved, or what's the key indicators that the battery's not involved?
Well, I can usually tell when the battery's involved because we've actually done, again, we did a battery pack, not a complete battery pack, but we had a sealed battery pack. We did the diesel pool fire test on it at the HSE in Buxton with Akzo Nobel, and we could tell when the modules inside the battery pack went because you get a white flare. Normally when it's burning, it's kind of yellowy, but you get an intense white flare when the modules go up, when the actual lithium batteries go up. But you have to be able to see that. And of course, you've got no way of accessing the vehicle to find out what its BMS is saying or anything. And even if you did, probably the systems would have shut down. So it's difficult to be able to be for sure. But at least if it's burning, then it's not venting explosive gas. So at least you can then have a good look and say, oh, it doesn't look like it's, and also you can get quite directional flames. So if you've got directional flames,
non-typical flames, like if anything else was on fire,
the lithium batteries are going.
Yeah. So you're looking for a directional high velocity flame would be one key indicator, I suppose.
Yeah, that's white.
Yeah. If the vapor cloud is evident, and again, because it is heavier than air, that should be a key indicator.
Well, what you see is not actually the gases. What you're seeing are the organic products from the thermal runaway and the droplets of unreacted solvent. And I believe that certainly the unreacted solvent is predominantly what looks like a buoyant smoke, and the products of the
toxic.
Thermal runaway is the heavier than air vapor cloud, but you've still got absolutely colourless, transparent gases like hydrogen, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. You've also got NOx, nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxides, and you've got things like methane, ethane. The predominant components are actually the carbon dioxide, the carbon monoxide, the hydrogen, and the methane, ethane. The hydrofluoric acid gas, hydrochloric acid gas tends to be at 100 parts per million. And then you've got around 100 organic compounds, including acrolein and benzene, present at trace levels.
Do we have a template for suggested cordons on this, given any standard size of a vapor cloud from an average size of an EV vehicle?
There's nothing that's based on
toxic gas for full SCBA.
There's nothing that's based on scientific testing. Most fire and rescue services are developing their own procedures. I'm not even aware if the police have developed any procedures, to tell you the truth, or ambulance. I mean, I've managed to penetrate quite deeply into the fire service and help lots and lots of fire services around the country and abroad. The only people I've helped in the police are the Derbyshire police, and I've done nothing for the ambulance service as far as I can tell.
Well, yeah, you'd hope they work within our safe systems of operations when they arrive.
I'm sure they will.
Ambulance tend to arrive later than us, with the greatest respect. They're a bit busier.
Yeah.
So you've got that heavy vapor cloud, only anybody donned in SCBA. You've got that. I mean, if this is on a highway, you've got traffic backing up and you're looking for a flip coin in the air of wind direction. And if it's pushing its way towards all these other vehicles, backed up around it because we've shut 2 lanes of the motorway, you're really looking to start evacuating people out of their vehicles and pushing them back at quite a rapid pace.
Again, you're the expert. That's way above my pay grade. But what I can say is that I think the last I saw, the average time to deal with an electric vehicle was 3 to 5 hours, whereas it's less than an hour for a conventional vehicle. to put it out and get the rope.
Yeah, but that vapor cloud explosion is my biggest concern, because that can happen very early on in the incident with very little notice. And even if we forget the vapor cloud itself at the moment, the pressure wave created by that deflagration and the shrapnel element of it just brings in so many factors.
This is why you're looking at this idea of a cordon, because with a fire, basically you'd say 15, 20 meters. But if you've got essentially...
Or you're thinking there is thermal radiation and a slight bit of toxic fume.
But if you've got a confined vapor cloud explosion with the attendant shrapnel, there was an explosion in Germany.
Well, it's a bomb, effectively, isn't it?
Yeah, in Germany, I think it was Weiss, place in Germany, they had a confined vapor cloud explosion where it vented into the passenger compartment of a Renault Zoe. That exploded inside the garage. That ripped the garage apart, shrapnel. But the flame then shot out and set fire to a BMW parked outside, and that was completely gutted. So it's a very rare, and again I come back to the fact these are very, very, very rare events. But rather like we are perfectly happy to go through extensive security systems when we go into an airport, even though the probability of a terrorist attack is presumably, hopefully, really tiny now. But we're happy to do it because the hazard is high. This is why we need to train people, to educate people. Let's take out the human factor at least from the equation.
Yeah, let's raise the proficiency of the member of the public more than anything else. Because like you say, those preventional elements that they can do within their own home. Because with the greatest respect, house fires are very rare. If you were to, throw a template of the number of people living in homes in the UK versus the percentage that have a fire, then the percentage that have a fire that spreads past the room of origin, then the percentage that do that which injure anybody, percentage that do that with have a fatality, tiny, infinitesimal. But it's become part of our behavioural conditioning about how we behave in the home, how we look after ourselves and our families. And we're, like you say, a lot of the risks sound as though they're relatively high risk, low probability, or low likelihood.
It's high hazard, low probability.
Yeah, low probability.
But then what also comes into it is sample size. So risk is a function of sample size. In other words, the number of lithium-ion batteries out there, probability and hazard. And the hazard is high, but the probability is low. But a simple thing like don't leave your charging cables lying on the floor and drive over them. Again, human factor. And if you're going to rocket charge, then probably I would try and rocket charge as little as possible. I'd prefer to charge my vehicle over, and I don't have an electric vehicle, but if
mine's a 7 kilowatt trickle charge. Yeah,
I would just trickle charge. Unless I had an urgent need, I'd run out and I desperately needed to get somewhere, in which case I'd rocket charge, but I wouldn't rocket charge every day. No.
But again, that becomes an elitist perspective. I'm very lucky in the economical position in my life that I have a driveway. A lot of the places, again, that you typically find these inner cities where they have ULEZ regs and things like that, and people running the cables across their paths out their front door, poking out the window to plug into their vehicles. And I would imagine those charging cables quite a significant amount of damage. Just from general
don't daisy chain them as well. But again, as you say, what we must avoid doing is basically by introducing perhaps not even very draconian regulations, exclude the poorer people from the benefits of the new technologies that are coming out.
Very difficult problem to solve. I want to be respectful of your time. What are you working on at present? Take us forward over the next 12 to 24 months. It looks as though you've got quite a lot going on. I know you're always a very busy man. We had to schedule a couple of times to get this one in. You are speaking at the Electric Vehicle Maritime Safety Conference in October. It's wonderful to see you presenting on that. I imagine you'll cover some of what we've discussed today.
Too right. I will.
What are some of the key messages that you'll be looking to push over this next 12 to 14 months that gives people some really tactical, useful information for where we are now?
And again, what really gets my goat is companies claiming that they can put out electric vehicle fires or battery energy storage system fires when the science just simply isn't there.
Okay.
Remember that it's not a fire triangle. I mean, you do have a fire triangle with lithium batteries, but you also have a thermal runaway object as well. Okay, and you can flip back and forward. So anything that kills fire but does not stop thermal propagation switches the hazard from fire to explosion, and then it can switch back again. And one of the key things I'm going to be doing is assisting in writing up all the tests that we did at Greater Manchester. I'm getting my colleague and friend Dr. Wojciech Mrozik is going to be posting that online after we've shown the data to our sponsors, which was the Faraday Institution and the Fire Industry Association. Thank you very much. We're going to be doing some tests with Akzo Nobel, really exploring this idea of passive fire protection and to what extent it is relevant to lithium-ion battery focused fires where we've got these jet-like flames. So that we're going to be just doing some testing there. I'm going to be
talking about those containment units, sorry, that you said there's 50 of in Sweden.
Yeah,
I believe
containers.
It was. Yeah, obviously we see a couple of companies in the UK, a friend of mine with the EVCU and examples such as that. Not an answer as such, but certainly a control mechanism to get it away from other
it
members
might
of
be
the public.
the only thing you can do in the horrible situation where you've got an EV, down here outside my office in Newcastle city centre decides to go into thermal runaway. And maybe the only thing you can do then to stop gridlock is to lift it and drop it into a container such as the one you've described. I certainly think they've got a role. I also think fire blankets have got a role, but again, it comes down to the fact when you wrap a burning electric vehicle in a fire blanket, you will cut off the oxygen, but you will not stop thermal propagation. No. And if that fire blanket is permeable, you could actually simply shift the locus of an explosion from around the car to outside the car. So you really need to understand the risks and hazards if you're going to deploy fire blankets. But I do believe fire blankets have a role. And then I'm also doing some work with our military, but I can't tell you what that is, or I'd have to kill you.
Good. Well, I'm just glad they're soliciting your input, and I hope that they take it on board. I love having academics on here. Yeah. It helps the romantic individuals such as me actually help put some rigid data and facts behind our whimsical beliefs, because we are very very optimistic about our abilities sometimes, and that's not to say that we're not diligent and enthusiastic and willing to learn.
All I've ever come across are fantastic firefighters, male and female, and again a shout out to Greater Manchester for all their support. They've been brilliant. What I will say is one of the things we are pushing very strongly, which is focused on the university but also the Faraday Institution, is we're trying to get funding for a battery safety test centre in the northeast where we can do all sorts of testing, from e-scooters right the way up to battery energy storage systems to electric vehicles, where we can educate, we can certify. We are pushing very strongly because we've got everything in this area. We've got AASC with the battery, still only the only gigafactory, lithium-ion battery gigafactory in the UK. They've been great. Work with them. With Nissan, they're great. I work with them. We've got the ports. We've got all the expertise, everything, and that's something that I will definitely be doing a lot of work on in the ensuing months.
Yeah, I know you've referenced a number of other individuals that support you on these papers and stuff like that. So we will put a number of links below here for people to go and delve further into that, because you are certainly, probably from my perspective and many people I speak to in the services, with the main subject matter expert on it, but you've been very kind today in acknowledging a great number of colleagues that are supporting your work. There's a lot of people working behind this, and on behalf of the UK Fire and Rescue Service, we're very grateful for the efforts that you're putting in, because I know
enjoy it. I enjoy working with firefighters. They're great fun.
We're very grateful for it, but I also acknowledge it's not where all the money is sometimes.
No.
So, not to blow smoke up your ass, but it's very kind of you to do it, because I think the lessons that we learn now truly will trickle down and keep thousands, if not millions, of people safer around the UK.
Well, if we hadn't had the support from Greater Manchester, we couldn't have done those fire extinguisher tests. That took essentially 4 weeks. and they were really great, giving us a firefighter for 4 weeks, giving us access to their facilities. We couldn't have done it without their help.
Dave and the team there are doing some really interesting stuff. We regularly go down and do some fire behaviour stuff. So I'll extend that thanks again to him and to yourself, sir. Thank you so much for your time, sir. Really do appreciate it.
Very great pleasure. Always a pleasure. Cheers, Pete.
The Firefighters Podcast was created to recognise, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means that we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, then please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month, you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you are in the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.